welcome everyone to another episode of Race, Culture, and the Church. Race, Culture, and the Church. And I invite all of you all that are watching now to go back, look at the 20 or so podcasts that we've assembled on that subject since 2020 on race, culture, and the church. Today, I am pleased, I am over the top pleased that I have as our guest Lee Pringle. He is the founder and director of The Color of Music, and I'll let him share what that means. But Lee, welcome to Sacramento.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for, I know this was short notice, but you made it happen, and you've got a lot going on, and you could be anywhere, but you're here in what we like to affectionately call the 1931 Sanctuary of City Church of Sacramento. Lee, tell us about how you got here and what is The Color of Music. I'm looking at a beautiful, very well produced, and I do have an eye for great production. But to have this brochure on the events that are going to be happening the 10th through the 13th. So, Lee.
Well, thank you for having me. And I have such an appreciation wanting to be an architect when I was a teenager of this beautiful edifice with all the original little segments of elements that the architect who designed this original building in the 30s. And so I'm just delightful to be here.
Thank you.
And I'm so grateful to you and your wife for the generous offer when we were at an event a week ago here in Sacramento. So the Color of Music Festival, for your listeners, those who are not watching this on camera, is a Black classical musicians festival that I started in historic Charleston, South Carolina in 2013. After spending 25 years in corporate financial services for 3 legacy institutions, I spent nearly 15 years at MetLife in the New York home office in New York City. And then I spent another 8 years at TIAA Craft. They now have shortened their name to TIAA. Mm-hmm. And the last 5 years in corporate financial services with Gerber Life Insurance Company that was based in White Plains, New York. So my background is somewhat, I guess you can say, circuitous in that I started in a small town outside of Charleston, South Carolina, born and raised in this area called Berkeley County, unincorporated. My mother still lives there today in the house that I grew up in. And I found myself being intrigued by the Navy because I had a cousin who went to San Diego to boot camp and came back showing me palmetto trees and palm trees that were different than the ones in the marshy South Carolina pluff mud. And I was fascinated. So I ended up spending 8 years in the U.S. Navy, 2 of which I spent at Naval Air Station Alameda on the USS Carl Vinson. I was a part of the original maiden cruise there. Did 8 years of that. My last three years, I was the communications aide for the admiral that was in charge of all subs for the eastern part of the country, Subgroup 6. I think they're now in Kings Bay, Georgia. And decided that last year I was in that I was not going to make the Navy a career. And so I got the job working for MetLife and did that, as I said, for almost 15 years. And that whole career path of corporate financial services from the retail side to the New York home office, from regional, territorial, and so forth, was really the place that kind of gave me some of the skill sets that I would be able to bring to a Color of Music as an arts administrator.
Did you have that in mind at the time?
Never, ever.
Okay.
In fact, I thought, I would split my time between someplace cool in the north and in my Charleston home during those winters. But as fate would have it, The Color of Music was birthed because I was a director on the Charleston Symphony Orchestra's board of directors, and they asked me to be on their artistic committee. So I suggested ideas for concerts that would highlight Black composers' works and also give Black conservatory-trained musicians an opportunity to actually showcase their talent. And for various reasons, the symphony at the time just could not get their head around it. And so out of being very disenchanted, I shared with a friend of mine who lives in Dallas, Fort Worth, who was visiting me at the time, that I was thinking about resigning from the board. And she kind of talked me off the cliff and said, but who's going to advocate for the community if you're not there? And I had started something that I haven't shared with you, and that is I started a gospel choir with the Charleston Symphony. It was called the CSO Gospel Choir for the first 12 years. It's since I spun it off and formed its own separate 501c3 tax-exempt entity, and it's called the Charleston Gospel Choir.
CSO stands for?
Charleston Symphony Orchestra. So we were an official affiliate under the Charleston Symphony, and then when I decided to move on, I spun it off, rebranded it as the Charleston Gospel Choir. And that was really a part of this journey that I was sharing with you off camera that actually put me into this space that I'm in today, because I had never produced a concert, ever. I sang in, Mount Pisgah AME Church's Sunbeam Choir as a little boy, with all this classical stuff that I do. I often tell my colleagues that, God forbid when my time comes, I don't want no Italian arias. I don't want nothing highfalutin. I just want some good old gospel. And I need, may the work I've done speak for me.
Amen.
Playing. And the joke to my choir members is, if y'all don't do that, I'm going to pop up out of the coffin and scare all of you. So all joking aside, so my path to where I am today, having met you and your bride at a special event at the Crocker Art Museum, all came about as a result of me being very frustrated with where an organization that I had dedicated a lot of personal time was going, and their lack of understanding what I was handing them. I was literally handing them this concept. So when I embarked on this, I did some things that just came from my understanding of corporate structure and getting a business degree in college, and just merged those things along with my mother's attention to detail teachings, my mother Elsie Mae, and my father's example of just steadfast, follow through, being a man of your word, and doing the best that you can. So,
how many years ago was this now?
This was
from CSO today.
So this started in 1992.
Wow.
And for the past 23 years, post, with the exception of COVID, the pandemic coming, I produced a gospel Christmas concert with full orchestra every year. And that's one of those little tidbits I told you I was going to go into.
In Charleston.
In Charleston. I also did it with the Colorado Symphony for 2 years. I did it with the Somerville Symphony. And I've had other symphonies ask me to do it, but my bandwidth was limited. I was still very active in the corporate world at the time. And because when you're dealing with volunteer artists compared to having all professional artists in my festival, you're getting some of that, what we call in the Southeast South, whosoever can come sing kind of group. Right. They're never going to really commit wholeheartedly, but they want to be on the stage when the lights come up. And, having been raised by my parents and my aunts and my cousins and having Black educators, I just never did well with this mindset of pervasiveness of mediocrity being the norm. And for that reason, I'm a taskmaster when it comes to presenting excellence. You got a chance to see one of my productions. And from beginning to end, I think that if somebody is going to give of their time, particularly if they're paying for it, it's my responsibility to give them experience that every touch point, it's not something that is what I call a cringeable moment or frustration. And that's not always easy, but as long as, from the top, you're managing to make sure that all your business partners are doing the very best they can do when it comes to executing your plan, but most importantly, all those things that people who take the time to come and experience your
Clearly, it sounds that you demonstrate, you expect excellence, but you give excellence.
I don't know any other way to do it. And so that's why I have such an appreciation for what you're doing and your ministry. All you got to do is come to this wonderful church campus, and the moment you drive up, you can see the attention to detail. And from the modern sanctuary to the maintenance and the way you all have maintained this original building, is all indicative of how you and your wife and the congregants take pride in
bless you.
what you're doing. Yeah.
Bless you. I need you to be part of our promotional committee. So,
I took a lot of marketing classes to get that business degree.
I appreciate it. As you alluded to, though, we were at the kickoff, if you will.
The command performance. Yeah.
That's what command performance. And I don't know why I should have been slack-jawed, but I was slack-jawed. I was so moved, both by the performance and, as you just detailed, the quality. I'm guessing, let me go out on a limb, that my reaction is pretty typical.
It is, and thank you for that compliment, because there are so many moving parts, particularly when you're operating out of not in your domicile, and you're 3,000 miles across the country, trying to make this work. And to save money, we are a nonprofit. I didn't bring 3 staff members to handle those 2 artists. I literally did all that myself, with having my German videographer who does most of my video production with me. We were the only 2 people from Charleston. And as you remember, I took the time to meet and greet as many people as I could during the reception.
You did.
Because I wanted people to understand that although we're doing an art form that is known to be stuffy, I'm not stuffy, and therefore I don't want my organization to be seen as such.
Just real quick, I mean, I was so impressed. I mean, the grace and humility that you extended. That's why I said, "Oh, you're the man," and you're coming to the table to introduce yourself and to say, "Welcome in." A lot of folks would say, "Well, I have people that do that." No, you did that, and that speaks volumes.
I feel that my spirit, for some reason, resonates with Sacramento. And that all started with former council member Larry Carr, who teed all this up. And when he met me, he pretty much, believed in me, hadn't seen anything I had produced yet, but I guess just the way that we had engaged prior to me flying out here, he felt that this would be good for the city and it would be good for the youth, not only Black youth, but white youth and Latin youth, and just youth in general, looking at classical music as not a white European construct. And if they can be inspired by the things that I'm doing and showcasing, then I think that's better for the art form in and of itself, because we still have children that if they can't see themselves, they can't dream. They got to be able to see themselves wanting to be an architect or, an astronomer or a mathematician. And the more we get them to kind of touch and feel it, they will take an interest, because kids' mind can absorb so many things that I want classical music to be one of those things that it's the last water fountain for them to have to experience, where it's for the white folks and it's not for us.
Great.
And so I really think that what we're doing, our mission, is one that I'm hoping there will be a sunset provision that the color of music will not need to exist. We won't need to bring Black classical artists together, because we will be such, noticed permeating the orchestral stages of North America. We would be obsolete. But, I think that our niche and what we do is what we need right now.
See, I follow your the parallel with, say, the Negro Leagues and professional baseball, but I think there's a place for both.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be either or.
Nope.
And to your point, again, you may or may not recall when we spoke, I said if I had to choose between the event at the Mondavi or at the Memorial, what would I had to choose? And you said, that's a horrible choice.
Like asking parents to say which kid is better.
Correct. So you'll be happy to know, Mr. Pringle, that my wife and I have tickets to both, and purchased tickets for 3 of our teenage granddaughters to go to the Mondavi, because I just felt it was so important. You need to see this. You need to be a part of this. And exactly to your point, if you can see it lived out and demonstrated in others, I could do that.
Absolutely. It's amazing that what we can conceive, we can achieve. If we can't conceive it, it's a struggle to go, because the first impediment, you go, I can't do that. But if you can conceive it here, you're willing to do what I tell young kids, and I tell my volunteer choirs. I have a spiritual ensemble and I also have a gospel choir. And I tell these volunteers many of whom are old enough to be my parent, a lot of retired black educators and, superintendents, and they ran health departments. And, they remind me that they're older than me. But I always say to them, the difference between all you high achievers, masters and doctorates and EDs, the difference between those who are very good and those who are extraordinary, the extraordinary person is willing to do the one more thing the very good person wasn't willing to do.
Wow.
And for that reason, if you're willing to spend an extra hour a week looking through your music, listening to the practice tape we give you, when you get here, you will be prepared. Because I know all of you did that to get graduate degrees and all these advanced degrees. You can do it for me. Just because you're a volunteer doesn't mean you can't put the time in. And so I don't do anything, as you have seen, that I don't ask my staff to do. And I say that with not exaggerating. I've literally done everything that, when you're starting something from scratch and you don't have the ability to have a big payroll, you have to get out there and do it. So I've set up music stands and done the lighting cues, and
from ushering to emptying waste baskets.
Chief marketing officer, CFO, W-9, getting 1099s ready, so it's very little that someone can come to me and say, oh, I'm having a problem with that, because I go, no, this is how you do it.
Do you, again, let me chase that point. This is something literally the country should be behind. Have you, what have you sensed in terms of receptivity within specifically the African American community? Again, I'll plead ignorance. I didn't know of the color of music. Now I know. Now I'm in, and I'm in the deep end of the pool, as I like to say. I'm not in the shallow end testing the water. Yeah. So I'm in the deep end, splashing about. What has been your experience? Is there resonance within the African American community, or what?
I get a combination of both. First, I get this sense of pride. Most African Americans who experience historically black college experiences know that classical music was the first music we were exposed to after we were colonized or abstracted from the continent of Africa. I use the best example. People always talk about how rhythmic black people are, and I say that's because our gene pool comes from a place where instruments that are now considered classical instruments had their origin, and the first is the marimba. It's named after an African queen named Marimba, but it's known in the orchestral world as the xylophone. And Dr. Sean Daniels is my principal timpanist. He's at Alcorn State University in Lawrence, Mississippi. He's the director of the fine arts department there. We did a wonderful, if you go to our YouTube channel, we did a wonderful recital at the height of COVID, mask and all kinds of protocols of him playing the marimba with a concert pianist. And I said to him I wanted to produce that concert showing one of the original percussion instruments so that our kids would understand that if you like banging on drums and snares and cymbals, there's actually a path, what you learn in high school or play in college band, that you can actually have a career path in. And so it's one of the unique things when you say, how does the black community in particular respond to this? I would say pride first, and then an inquisitive interest on learning more about what they don't know about their community in classical music. In fact, the postcard that you were referring to for the camera that's on me is of a gentleman by the name of Chevalier de Saint-Georges, and he was a contemporary of Haydn and Amadeus Mozart. Now, Chevalier was 11 years older than Amadeus Mozart, and he wrote 6 operas. He was appointed to music director at the Paris Opera. He was even a soldier in Napoleon's Revolutionary Army. Born in Guadeloupe as to an enslaved woman. His father was a white sugarcane plantation owner, but gave Chevalier a classical education that Madison or Jefferson would have had. So he was an extraordinary man. He was tall in nature for the time, good looking. You know, there are books written about Chevalier. The Canadian Broadcast Company did a documentary on him. You can find it on Amazon. And there's a motion picture that's actually in production to tell his story. But he is the example of how many things the Black community are connected to classical music on, that because if you're colonized, you don't get to tell your history. The colonizer tells your history. So we have this belief as Black people globally, we didn't do classical music, which we have plenty of proof from George Bridgetower, to there's some others that are slipping my memory now that are all a part of that time frame. Even Beethoven has Black ancestry. His family was the Moors. So there are all these things that those of us who have a connection to the continent of Africa, that's where mankind started, that we just have not been able to tell the story. And I think Color of Music, every time we present, we educate another segment of our society. Because most people go, I never thought of how white American orchestras are until I saw the Color of Music Festival. And now when I see an orchestra, I'm like, wow, there are no Black players in there. And I'm going, there's 1,700 orchestras in America.
I appreciate that. So the education, does it extend to non-Black audiences?
Absolutely.
How has that lived out?
Well, let me just say this. The predominant money that I get through fundraising, donor-advised funds at community foundations, 70% of it comes from the white community.
Who's in your audience, percentage-wise?
60% white, 40% Black.
And the 60% that are in your audience, I won't say, is it curiosity? You know, folks, visiting the museum or whatever. I'm just curious. Mm-hmm. Or have you experienced that aha moment, transformation? Again, our podcast is called Race, Culture, and the Church. And as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, seems like I'm saying it every podcast, as he said, the most segregated time in America is Sunday morning.
Comma, and classical arts, opera, ballet, and symphonic chamber music associations. And so to answer your question, is the 6% majority population having an epiphany? No. Those are patrons of the arts who have always questioned, why isn't there more diversity in this art form that I really enjoy?
Really?
And they're fascinated when they learn about a Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Because if they were in music school and went to conservatory, it was never taught. They were only taught the white European dead composers. And if you think Black composers and conductors are an anomaly still, it's even worse for Black females. And we have Black females that have been going to conservatory in every discipline since they've had the opportunity to open the door and walk in. But the reality of it is, the art form itself, the people who make the decisions struggle with a Black woman commanding an orchestra. It's a mental block. And they can run circles around the men, white and Black. But there's an uncomfortableness, I call it the big elephant in the room, that when it really comes down to, the Black woman can be exceptional. The mental block is here, where the male, and even now, nothing against Latin Americans, Latin American males are just killing it. Correct. All you gotta do is go to L.A. Phil Correct. And many others, Gustavo Dudamel and so forth, because they have a community and a system and all these developing countries there where a lot of these men and women come from that supports classical music with the El Sistema program and many other programs. They give young kids from South America string instruments. Okay, so there's more of an emphasis on strings than on the ivories of piano. And so you get these wonderful artists who deserve these platforms that they get. But in America, we have a different palette. And, and I'm just speaking honestly because I have a Black institution. Still, when it comes down to aesthetics, the majority population can see a Latin person commanding an orchestra, and they can't visualize seeing a Black male or Black female.
I like how you use the word palette. I had this conversation with my daughter, who's a high school math teacher with 3 children. And a conversation came up about vegetables. And, well, I don't make my kids eat vegetables if they don't like them, but they have to try it.
Yes.
What is necessary to incentivize to I guess you're doing it. I am answering my own question. It's the color of music to put the broccoli on the plate and try it. You just might like it.
I think the first thing we have to do, meaning I don't want to speak for every Black person, but because we're not monolithic.
You've got that responsibility
well,
today.
I'll take it and articulate as best as I can. Let me just say this. I understand as a Black male from the South, every time that I present, I'm representing my people.
Yes.
And one of the things that I admire about the legendary Leontine Price, who will be 95 in February, and her brother, General George B. Price, has become a very good friend and financial support, as well as picking up the phone, calling opera heads all over the country to support color of music. General Price, if you ever hear this, I appreciate you. But Leontine Price understood coming behind Marian Anderson, who was the trailblazing soprano who really opened the door for Black classical artists on many, many levels. By the time Leontine Price came around, television was, well known at the time, and she understood she had to give 150% every performance. There was no room for failure. And, in many interviews, you'll see her on YouTube and so forth talking about how, as a young adult, she wanted to do things that young adults did. And, from having a family to choosing to stay the course for the betterment of her people, she couldn't have as much fun. I mean, she has a wonderful life, even at this age, that when she was not working, she could do it. But she commented about she had to become like a nun. Like she had to sequester herself from things that would, interfere with her being 100%, 150% when she walked on the stage, because she could not do something to adversely affect her voice or expose herself to a cold or a virus or anything like that, because the platform was so rare that she had to put it all in. So I have admired her for that, because in a small way, every time I execute a program, I know that I'm representing every Black classical organization that will come behind me. That if it's a hot mess, when the majority population come in who can support it, or even my community, then that's the mental thing that they think of is, well, Black classical contributions, I saw something and it was kind of okay. And I just can't afford to do that. I literally have to put forth the best artists and have everything from the engagement of getting a ticket to the moment they step up to get a program, to making sure that the temperature is not, out of whack, that the lighting cues work. I mean, there's just all these things that my friends who call me a little control freak, because they know that I believe in managing the details, they don't understand what I deal with when I have to represent my community in an art form that the vast majority of people still struggle that we should even be there.
I could talk to you, Lee, for days. We're running out of time, and I want to make sure that, well, let me just ask it. So along the lines almost of Queen Esther, when she was in the situation she was, and her uncle said, who knows, you were here for such a time as this. Let me just ask, in retrospect, did you find the color of music, or did the color of music find you?
I think the color of music found me. And the reason that I can say that without hesitation, I have learned, as we were talking, I'll be 58, and I try to be an astute person and try to process. I wanted to go to law school and had a friend talk me out of it. So I do think critically about a lot of things. And if you see me moving and doing things, I've had scenarios and cause and effect. That's just how I process. And I believe that when my good friends, because I'm still very good friends with the staff at the Charleston Symphony, at the time didn't understand it, that was a door that God was saying to me, I know you really want this to happen there, but I got something better for you. And so now, whenever I put all my effort, and I know when I lay my head down and say my prayers at night, that everything that was destined for me, if it came, it was because it was supposed to. If it doesn't work out, I accept it because I know I've done my best, and I move on to the next chapter. And I try to impart that on people who are just so, disillusioned about things. And I just say, you gotta think that there was a reason that you weren't supposed to get this. There was a reason you weren't supposed to do this. And if you can just think of it in that way, you will open your heart and your mind to what is really supposed to be yours. And I am doing exactly what God intended for me to do, because if He didn't want me to do this, I would have had all those things worked out at the Charleston Symphony before I said, I'm going to pivot this way.
Lee Pringle, founder and director of The Color of Music. If you don't have your tickets, you need to get your tickets. Some venues, some events have already sold out. So much for that. But there are still tickets available. I encourage you to go. I encourage you to become a member. I'm going to look into membership and do more than look into it. My wife and I will, at whatever level we can afford, we will become subscribing members to The Color of Music. I appreciate you. You are in my prayers.
Thank you.
This cannot be the last time you're here, either on this podcast or in Sacramento. And I invite you to have whatever you want in this space. And there is no cost. You come into this space, you put on a performance, we welcome you in. So
I'm going to hold you to that, because I am going to do, y'all hear that, right? Lee Pringle will be producing some events in this beautiful space in the future. Stay tuned.
thank you, Lee, so much.
Thank you. Thank you for
Bless
having
you.
me.
Thank you.